The following is a selection from my short story collection called The Gods of War. This one is titled Where Have All the Children Gone? As the school bus pulled away from the curb, Billy walked home. Little 8-year-old feet pattered out sneaker steps along Wayland Street, which turned onto Market Place. He smiled and strutted that happy it's Friday and I don't have to go to school till Monday strut as he came to the corner of Market and Jones Road. He stopped at the curb and carefully looked both ways, once, then again, just to make sure, his mother always said, then crossed quickly to the other side. He walked to the end of Jones Road and took a right up to Layton, up a block and left to Davis, two more blocks and another left to Ryerson, and the final right turn onto Lewis Drive, almost home. That Friday afternoon smile widened a bit. Those sneakers pattered a little faster, the unconscious anticipation of nearing home. Time for the countdown. 133, 131, 129, 125. Whatever happened to 127, Billy always wondered. To 123. That was Mr. Miller's house. Had to keep off the grass or he would yell at you and tell your mother. And there was Mr. Miller watering his lawn again. It seemed he was always watering his lawn. Billy thought it must be drowned by now. Billy waved. Miller grunted and continued sprinkling. Now 121. That was Mrs. Devlin's. She liked to bake cookies, and eat them too. It showed. She always brought over a batch or two when she did. Sometimes the air was so filled with the sweet smell of melted chocolate that you could almost taste it on the wind. And finally 119. Home. Billy could see the big Anderson written across the side of the mailbox, and the fixture of the old Chrysler sedan parked at the end of the driveway. Home. A contented sigh left his lips and he didn't even realize it. Then suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, a man appeared from behind the Chrysler. He wore a white zip-up overall that had a small circle of blue with a section that looked like a pie wedge cut away from it on the upper left. He wore dark glasses and his jet black hair was combed so tightly that it looked like it had been sculpted out of clay. Billy walked up to say hello. "Hi, Ketzy," Billy greeted. "Hello, Billy," Ketzy returned. "How are you today?" "No school till Monday," he joyfully stated. "I thought you liked school," Ketzy asked, looking quizzically. "I do, but—" Ketzy smiled and nodded. "I understand. Shall we go inside, Billy? I have something I want to give you." "What?" he asked with giddy enthusiasm. "Inside," came a flat reply. Billy's enthusiasm ended and his smile disappeared. "Is it about the trip?" "Yes." "Already?" "Already." Billy almost frowned. He turned up the walkway toward the house and ascended the two concrete steps that led to the front door. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his key, opened the door, and went inside. Ketzy was right behind. Billy dropped his backpack onto the kitchen floor and pulled two chocolate chip cookies from the last batch Mrs. Delvin had brought over. These he washed down with a glass of cold milk that pasted a white mustache on his upper lip. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, went into the living room, and sat down on the couch next to Ketzy. Billy's eyes widened as Ketzy pulled something from his white overall, right out of where there appeared to be no pocket. It was simply a cube. Well, not simply. The cube measured 4 inches on a side, but it did not have any seams or corners where the edges met. It just seemed to wrap around itself, almost as if it wasn't solid. And the colors, red and green and gold and blue, every imaginable shade and tint spun round and round like a three-dimensional kaleidoscope. Slowly they turned, dissolving in and out of each other like clouds in a hurricane. Yet their movement was perfectly uniform, a three-dimensional whirlpool of every conceivable color. It rolled over and around the seeming borders of the cube as if there was more of it, somewhere. Ketzy placed the cube on the table in front of them. "Wow," Billy said. He reached out to touch it. "Careful," Ketzy said. Billy stopped and looked up at him. Slowly his hand closed the distance between he and the cube. He reached it. He touched it. It was warm. Billy's hand shuddered a little, then cautiously wrapped its fingers around the cube and picked it up. It pulsed in and out, ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, with a rhythm similar to breathing. Billy turned the cube in his palm and stared at it. He rubbed his thumb across its side. The cube felt very smooth and solid. It felt solid, but it didn't look solid. It appeared as if it had been precisely cut from some impossible spectral liquid. He put it back on the table. "What is it?" Billy asked. "It is many things, but for you it has only one specific purpose. I want you to listen closely, Billy, while I tell you what that is." Billy nodded. "Later I will tell you to pick up the cube again. I want you to place each hand on opposite sides of it. Slowly close your hands together until they touch. The cube will appear to vanish, but it will still be in your closed hands. Count to 3, then pull your hands apart as quickly as you can." Ketzy paused and looked directly into Billy's eyes. "Do you understand?" "Yes," he replied. Then he had a question for Ketzy. "Close my hands together, count to 3, then pull apart." Ketzi nodded. What will happen to me then? Ketzi smiled. Don't worry, everything will be just fine. You'll feel very warm, then very light, and then our trip will begin. Oh, Billy returned, half smiling. Then another question occurred to him that he thought might be important to ask. Are we going soon? Today. Today? He asked just to be sure he heard it the first rhyme. A little later this afternoon, Ketzi replied. And we can't take Mommy? No. Billy's head, almost in slow motion, dipped downward and rested on his chest. His eyes looked far away. Ketzi observed this curiously and sympathetically. You know that you don't have to go, Billy, he said. Billy perked up immediately. I want to, he exclaimed. It's important. Then his head sunk again. I just feel sorry about Mommy. So do I, Ketzi said, and touched him on the shoulder. But we just don't have a place for mommies. Billy nodded. He understood, or at least he thought he did. Ketzi faked a smile and leaned back against the couch. He wanted to say something else, something profound and comforting, but the words and phrases that interconnected in his mind did not seem enough. Somehow silence did. Billy's lips also fell silent as he turned toward the television and switched it on. He flipped through the 599 cable channels, past soap operas, 24-hour news shows, sports and weather channels, various reruns of old sitcoms, game shows, and a very tall lady with very big, what did you call those things? Who was doing thousands of jumping jacks per minute and talking about how great she felt. He finally settled on a cartoon. One speedy character was zooming his way along a two-lane highway with another in hot pursuit atop a rocket-powered skateboard. The road made a sharp left. The first character navigated the turn with ease. The second, of course, did not, probably neglecting to have read the fine print in the rocket skateboard instructions that warned it could only go straight, never attempt to use on a curved road. The rocket skateboard and its dumbfounded passenger sped off the edge of a cliff and out into the limbo of open air. The character wavered there for a moment, suspended in space, the famous "oh no, not again" look plastered on his face, and then he fell like a rock to the ground that seemed a mile away. A tiny mushroom cloud puffed up where he had landed, followed by two capitalized words, "The End." Then the screen went black. Commercial. The afternoon television saga continued through various animated animal shows, one really overly muscular guy who was master of everything, his twin sister who looked like an animated version of the Jumping Jack Lady, more sitcom reruns, and now the news. An older gentleman, about the same age as Billy's grandfather, and a woman a little younger than his mother, began to tell the story of the day's events. The same countries still warred with each other, the same terrorists still murdered in the name of their cause or their god, the starving still starved, the poor remained poor, the homeless homeless. And all over the country, some surmised all over the world, children continued to vanish. Billy picked up the channel changer to try and find another cartoon. Wait a minute, Billy. I'd like to keep watching this, Ketzi said. Billy grunted and put down the remote. The newscaster read on. That totals 30 children reported missing in the last 6 months from the Los Angeles County alone. Efforts by local police have turned up no significant clues to these mysterious disappearances, and they can only repeat their now commercialized warning to all youngsters. If it's someone you know, don't go. Lynn? Lynn shook her head. In a related event, sources have informed this network that the mayor is considering a sundown curfew for all children under the age of 13. Billy's head quickly turned. Something outside was trying to get in. He froze as he heard the sound of metal scraping against the lock of the front door. The tumblers clicked and fell. The knob turned and the door slid open, dragging across the carpet. A gloved hand crept around the edge of the door. The glove was black and long, all the way up to the elbow. The arm followed the hand past the edge of the door, then disappeared back behind it. A groan erupted. Then a large plastic sack thudded down onto the floor, a sack filled with groceries. Groceries? Mommy! Billy exclaimed and sprung up from the couch like a freshly released jack-in-the-box. Mrs. Anderson bent down to hug him as he jumped to greet her. She kissed him on the forehead and let him back down. She held her son's head in her hands and tilted it up to her. She smiled. He smiled back. Mrs. Anderson stared into the boy's eyes for a moment, then spoke. You haven't been this happy to see me in a long time. I love you, Mommy, he said, sadly, hugging her even tighter. Click. There went the motherly instinct warning light. She pushed him to arm's length and squinted into her eyes into that all right, what's going on look. She held his shoulders like handles and asked, What's the matter, honey? Nothing, Mommy, he returned, guiltily, but added, I'm just glad to see you, which really did all the convincing she needed. She smiled. No, she beamed. It wasn't very often that a boy his age would demonstrate that special love he felt for his mom, and Billy was no exception. He carried it around with him all the time, but to show it, no way. After all, he was no sissy, and only sissies kissed and hugged and told their mothers they loved them. Yeah, only sissies. Well, most of the time, anyway. This time was different. This time Billy had a very good reason. Billy picked up one of the bags and mother carried his mother had carried through the front door and walked into the kitchen. He set it down onto the counter with a thump, the cans inside jiggling about trying to escape. A second thump marked the landing of the other bag next to his. His mother opened up a few of the cabinets, and the process of sorting out the groceries began. Soup here, cereal there, milk in the refrigerator. Make sure to close it. Don't want to waste the electricity. Household cleaners with the green Mr. Yuck face under the sink. Paper towels onto the paper towel rack. Toilet tissue into the to be delivered later pile, and so on and so on. They made a great little team. Billy would announce the item. His mother would go over to the area where it would be placed. Billy would hand or toss her the item. His mother would put it away and then wait for the next announcement. It was a ritual they'd practiced and perfected over the years, the sort of little thing you took for granted, like too many other little things, but the sort of little thing you remembered. Billy watched his mother closely during the whole process, the way she smiled, the sliding kind of motion she used when she moved from cabinet to refrigerator to cabinet, the funny way she juggled a soup can she didn't quite catch cleanly, the oops expression that crossed her face when she dropped a box of cereal to the counter. Billy would remember these little things. He would even miss them. They packed up the grocery bags and put them away, and then moved back to the living room. Billy looked over to the couch and saw Ketsy still sitting there watching television. His mother saw the couch and the television, but of course no Ketsy. Billy stopped and grinned and turned to his mother. "Say hi to Ketsy, Mom," Billy said, gesturing in the direction of the couch. Ketsy shook his head and sighed. Mrs. Anderson forced a courteous smile and waved at the empty couch. How much longer would this continue? 8-year-olds weren't supposed to have imaginary friends, and this Ketsy character seemed like he might be around for another 8 years. She couldn't remember when he hadn't been around. A replacement for a father he never knew, their doctor had called him. But how long would this replacement remain with them, between them? Not very long, Mrs. Anderson. Not very long at all. Billy sat down on the couch next to Ketsy. He smiled up at his friend, who gave him a look that turned his expression upside down. "Sorry," he mouthed. His lips formed the words, but no sound came out. Ketsy nodded, and Billy's grin came back to life. His mother just shook her head and headed back into the kitchen, yelling over her shoulder, "I'm going to start dinner." Billy perked up at the thought of a meal and asked, "What are we having?" At this, Ketsy's head dropped just a bit. His expression hardened. This meal would never be served. Mrs. Anderson stopped her progression into the kitchen and hollered back, "Fried chicken and mashed potatoes." Billy's eyes lit up. Then his mother finished the menu, "with green beans and cauliflower." "Yuck," Billy snorted. "What was that?" his mother asked. "Nothing, Mom," he replied. "Dinner will be ready in about a half an hour," she finished, "so why don't you go out and play for a while? I'll call you when it's ready." "Okay, Mom." Whew, got out of that one, he thought, and started to get up off the couch. Ketsy grabbed his arm. Billy looked down at him, almost bothered by his gesture. "What?" he asked. Ketsy's grip relaxed, and he looked up at Billy with open, honest eyes. The type of eyes that held no secrets, the type of eyes that can be read, even by an 8-year-old. Billy's boyish bounciness quickly changed into adult acknowledgement. His head tilted in sad acceptance. "Can't I even say goodbye?" Billy's words were slow and heavy. Ketsy could only shake his head. As they both got up to head for the back door, he said just 3 words. "Bring the cube." The back door creaked as it opened. Hinges cried out as it swept through its arc out into the backyard. A hand followed behind the door, firmly gripping the handle. Billy moved through the passage, led by the hand and followed by Ketsy. They walked into the small backyard, surrounded on 3 sides by a tall wooden fence, and the fourth side by the rear wall of the house. The grass was short and neatly cropped, strange for a yard hidden except for those in the back foyer or bedrooms. An old swing leaned in one of its corners, rusted with age, but still good enough for an occasional return to childhood. An even older tree occupied another corner. Knots popped and erupted through its bark. A cross cut through its base would reveal scores and scores of concentric rings that marked each year of the tree's life. Few branches sprouted from its trunk, and few leaves from those branches. The tree looked almost dead, exactly as it had looked for as long as Billy could remember. Billy stared up at the old tree. Its gray bark reminded him of the gray hairs that his mother sometimes plucked from her head while she stood in front of the mirror. The gray meant age, and age the tree accepted, and age his mother would rather forget. Billy's stare shifted from the tree to Ketsy. No gray hair poked through the black. How old was Ketsy? Where was he from? Who really was this Ketsy? A spaceman or a god or just an imaginary friend, as his mother had told him? Billy didn't have an answer for any of these questions. He only knew that he trusted Ketsy, and that would have to be enough. Billy and Ketsy walked to the center of the yard. They turned toward each other, the young man and the older one. Billy held up the cube. It still pulsed with that strange energy, in and out. But it wasn't just warm anymore. It was hot. Billy looked up into Ketsy's eyes with fear and anticipation and, yes, trust. Ketsy slowly nodded his head once, and Billy fully understood the meaning. He placed the cube in one hand and his other hand on top of it. He turned his hands until they were perpendicular to the ground, the cube resting between them. A moment of apprehension overcame him. His hands began to tremble. He nearly dropped the cube. He looked up to Ketsi again. Relax, he smiled, and Billy felt immediately reassured. He put one he put more pressure on the sides of the cube and slowly, carefully pushed. His palms grew closer and closer together. The cube compacted. Billy remembered a sensation he could not associate with any particular time or place, a sort of muted deja vu. That sensation, squishing together a large, wet sponge, was precisely the same sensation he experienced as he pushed on the sides of the cube, with one exception. The cube wasn't pushing back. With the sponge, the smaller it got, the harder it got to make it smaller. The sponge wanted to be in the same shape as it started. The cube provided no such resistance. In fact, it seemed to require less and less pressure to make the cube smaller and smaller, as if the cube wanted to be in some other shape or some other place. Billy's hands touched, first at the fingertips, then slowly down past the knuckles all the way to the palms. They pressed tightly together, with no space, no substance between them. The cube had disappeared, gone into his closed hands or itself or somewhere else. Billy did not know where, nor did he know how. He only knew that what once was there no longer. And then, as the next instruction, like proof of some magician's trick, was to separate his hands. The cube would not be there, but what would? Billy counted to 3, then pulled his hands apart. A rainbow of light poured from his open palms, slowly at first, then faster and faster as his hands separated further and further. Brilliant hues of yellow and gold and azure and scarlet, speckled with twinkling starlights of white, arched between his hands, then up, out, over, and around him. He stood in a shadowy silhouette wrapped in a sea of color. The swirling spectrum of light flowed back into itself, completing an oblong casing that completely surrounded him. It remained still for a moment, shimmering under the backdrop of the twilight, and then, like the cube before it, gently closed upon itself, growing smaller and smaller until it finally vanished with but a hiss of wind to mark that it had ever existed. The glow of light shined through the kitchen window and startled Mrs. Anderson. She dropped the spoon she held into the sink. Metal tinged against metal. Mrs. Anderson's feet stepped slowly toward the back door. A strange fear overcame her, and her walk turned into a run. She burst through the back door. Ancient hinges exploded with creaking terror. The wooden door smacked against the wooden house, and not another sound could be heard. The house, the yard, the whole street was silent. Dead silent. Mrs. Anderson's chest heaved in and out at a pace far too quick for a mother who was just looking for a child she'd sent into the yard just 5 minutes ago. Billy? She called out like a question. She sensed something wrong. A child playing in the backyard made noise, lots of noise. The quiet fell on her like a chill of a winter night. The swing remained undisturbed, still motionless. Billy? She called out, expecting an answer. But the quiet was her answer. Billy! She called out like a demand. Street lights at the end of the street flickered on, marking the arrival of night, the arrival of darkness. Billy! She cried out in panic. But no answer came. Only the silence, only the stillness. Billy! They all gathered there on the day, hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of them, a horde of humanity rising up from the center of some gigantic amphitheater, row upon row, level upon level, pushing upward in concentric circles that were cut into 4 pie-shaped quadrants along sloping sides. A huge dome of solid white capped the arena several feet above the last row. It arched so smoothly into the cylindrical wall that no line or break could be discerned between the two. The wall slid into the floor and down the aisles to the base of this arena, where they and the arcs of seats stopped at the bottom. The floor leveled out for about 10 feet, then rose again in the form of a large disc some 50 feet across. This disc lay at the center, like a stage for some massive theater in the round. The audience's eyes lay transfixed upon it, waiting, some all their lives, for the crowning performance of mankind. But these were not the eyes of man. These were the eyes of children. Children of all sexes, races, and creeds and colors, of wealth and poverty, from the chilling poles at the ends of the earth to the steaming middle around the equator, all gathered together on this day, the day, when the purpose of their lives, the very reason for their presence, would unfold before their eyes like the petals of a rose before the morning sun. For they were the chosen. They were the seed of mankind that could grow, plush and vibrant in the garden of their lifetimes. Planted, they could extend their branches outward into eternity. Yet without fertile soil, without clean water, without the sun, the seed could never take root, and would remain hopelessly trapped in a desolate, barren land. The seed would shrivel and die, and the day would be the last day. In light of this, hope offered its tender hand and led the seed to a new garden, a garden devoid of deceit and corruption, mistrust and misunderstanding.